Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Transportation Committee this morning. We have quorum in the room, so we'll start the meeting. We have no regrets this morning, and declarations of interest. Seeing none. Confirmations in the minutes of March 4th, 2013. Carried? Carried. Thank you. Item number 1 is status update, Transportation Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending March 22nd, 2013. Received, thank you. Item number 2, quarterly performance report to Council Q4, October 1st to December 31st, 2012. Received? Thank you. Item number 3, we have delegations and also a staff presentation, so we'll hold that. Item number 4, I believe we also have some delegations on that, so we'll hold that as well. Item number 5, urban lanes encroachment policy. Okay, Councillor Foy would like to hold it. Item number 6, outdoor patio encroachment. 297 Dalhousie. Okay, we'll hold that one as well. Item number 7, sidewalk on Meadow Park Place.
Yes, hold that.
Hold that. Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Yeah, carried.
Do you simply not want to remove the sidewalk from the list?
I think that whole policy, but I won't rant. If you want to not rant, carry it.
Well, let's carry it then. I'm sure you'll find something else to rant about later. Item number 8, parking conditions in downtown Chinatown, BIA. I understand to be withdrawing that motion, Councillor Clark. Chinatown BIA, I understand to be withdrawing that motion this morning?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. All right then. So we'll go back to the items that are held then.
Mr. Chair, can
Yes?
I ask that the IPD item be raised so that I can talk to it today?
And which one is that, Councillor? For the record?
The IPD and the coroner's report, the pedestrian death report?
And you have some questions to staff?
Yes, I do.
And we need to know the rationale behind holding it.
Yes.
No, I appreciate that,
I'd like
Councillor
to talk
Williams.
to it and ask questions of staff, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Deans.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. So we'll add that. I was wondering, Councillor Holmes, since you don't regularly sit with us, would that take a long time? Do you have a lot of questions, or?
I think it'll take about 5 minutes, Mr. Chair.
Committee okay if we deal with that matter first? Okay, so let's do that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have the report from the coroner with me, and there are multiple recommendations for municipalities in that report, as it states in your IPD. And one of the major recommendations is that municipalities start to have a complete streets policy, so that when we redesign streets or build new streets, we look at all the users and make sure that we are providing space for pedestrians, cyclists, transit, and, of course, vehicles, so that everyone who uses the street has access to that street and sidewalks and so forth. I noticed that in the report, in the IPD, it talks about some of the Transportation Association of Canada's design guidelines, their manuals, their reports that we use as background documentation for our own street building. And the one Transportation Association of Canada's report that is not mentioned is the Neighbourhood Traffic Calming report that the Transportation Association of Canada wrote with Ron Jack as one of the consultants of this report. It's 1998, and I wondered why that was not included in the documentation that we use when we build streets. So that was one question. And the other question is, could we please provide an update, and I see Vivi Chi is here, on how we intend to use the complete streets, whether we will start to use that as a policy basis for road reconstructions and new road constructions.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Yes, we have complete streets as a policy, and it's been drafted in our update to our transportation master plan. But we've been working with the principles of complete streets for a number of years now. As you'll notice that we're starting to put in more cycle tracks, cycling lanes, safe cycling facilities, widening sidewalks, and these principles you'll also see, you saw in the Ottawa Moves study. So we are proceeding with this, and it is a balancing of different users of the street in the right-of-way.
And also, Ms. G, could you tell me why we don't include the neighborhood traffic calming report from the Transportation Association of Canada as one of our background documentations?
That may have been an oversight, but that's certainly a document that we're familiar with and we do use.
Okay, so you are in fact using it? Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
So we'll move to the first held item, which is item number 3, the Bronson Avenue Safety and Operational Review. We have a number of delegations on that, but before we get there, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank a number of my council colleagues, Councillor Chernyshenko, Councillor Deans, and Councillor McRae, who all met with me and worked at the end of the day on this report, and their input was very helpful, and I appreciate the collaborative manner in which they approached this this very significant safety issue in our city. So I want to thank them for that, and I want to thank staff as well. So we do have a presentation, and I suggest we go with the presentation, and then we can hear from delegations, and then any questions or concerns from members of committee or other council members. So I think Phil Landry is in the room to do the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of council. First, I'd like to introduce Krista Tanaka. She's the program manager for traffic investigations in our road safety group, and it was through her group that did this work, and I'd like to commend them on the job they did. This was a very short time of work to do, and they did a good job in identifying the issues and coming up with some countermeasures. So with that, I will go through a short presentation just to give you information on the results of our study. So in terms of background, this came up last November, and we were asked through a motion to undertake a comprehensive safety review of the corridor. And the corridor in question is on Bronson between Homewood and just south of Brewer Way. So our review included looking at from an engineering perspective, the collisions, traffic data, and speed data. We also did an extensive consultation with pedestrians and cyclists to get their understanding and how they feel at the intersections and along the corridor. And through all this work, it gave us the ability to develop some countermeasures that would address the issues identified through the technical review as well as through the consultation. But it needs to be noted as well that we wanted to strike a balance between the needs of pedestrians, cyclists, as well as motorists, because there is an acknowledgement that this road is a primary road for residents coming from the south end, from the airport to the downtown. So the measures that we've identified and that I'll be going through shortly ensure that we strike that balance between ensuring the safety of pedestrians and cyclists who use the corridor, as well as ensuring that we can still move traffic from the south part of the city to the core. So the existing data, the traffic volumes are approximately 45,000 vehicles to 51,000 vehicles along the corridor. The posted speed limit at the northerly end starts at 50, then goes to 60 over the Canal Bridge, transitioning to 70 kilometers just south of Brewer Way. The speeds along the corridor range around 75 kilometers an hour, and that's the 85th percentile. As well as the on and off ramps, the speeds range from 50 to 60 kilometers an hour. When we look at collisions, the total number of collisions over the last 10 years were 604, of which 18 involve cyclists and 14 involve pedestrians. This chart just shows the context of pedestrian and cyclist volume. As you can see, the volumes fluctuate throughout the year. We undertook a count this past January at Brewer Park and Sunnyside, and you can see the amount of pedestrians that are using this intersection. Now in the summer, when school's not in place, it sort of switches over to more cyclists, as well as there's still a high number of pedestrians that use it. But we can tell as when school's in at Carleton that there's a high demand of pedestrian activity at these intersections. So when we undertook our study, like I mentioned, we looked at the engineering as well as the pedestrian and cycling, how they felt as they used this corridor. And this was the consultation was done through a survey. We went out last November and surveyed about 100 people on site at the critical locations where pedestrians cross. We also put a survey online. It was another 500 respondents who responded to that survey. And the summary of those issues that were identified, as well as our engineering review, was the cycling of cyclists going the wrong way as they connect from the pathway at the university to Bronson Avenue near the canal. It's the high speeds of vehicles along the corridor, the mid-block pedestrian crossings between Sunnyside and Brewer Way, the difficulty for pedestrians to cross at several of the ramp locations as well as at the intersections. The cyclist collisions were overrepresented after dark and in September and under wet conditions. And so that was part of our a collision review. And what that tended to indicate to us is that, in September, it's starting to get dark earlier. The students have come back from holidays, or if they're new students, they're not aware of the context, and because classes tend to end around 9 o'clock when it's dark. So we're going to do some measures to address those issues as well as there are a high number of rear-end collisions at Brewer Way in the northbound direction. So when we look at all the information that we've had, we've come up with some immediate measures that we can implement this spring. And those include pavement marking, signage, and some signal modifications. So in this drawing here, we're looking at the northerly part of of Bronson Avenue. And what we're proposing to do here is to reduce the length of the right turn lanes, both in the northbound and the southbound direction. Again, this is to try to reduce the speed of vehicles as they're turning onto the off-ramps and onto Finley. We also want to provide signage to indicate the bicycle lane, as well as signage for motorists as they're crossing the crosswalks along the corridor to remind them to beware of pedestrians and cyclists using those crossings. As we move to the southern part of the corridor, at the intersections at Sunnyside, we're proposing to put the zebra markings across the intersection, again to give more priority to pedestrians, as well as continuing with the signage for the reserved bike lane. And down by Brewer Way, we're proposing to separate the cyclists and the pedestrians at the crosswalks. One thing we noticed last November when we were out there is cyclists and pedestrians would interact through the crosswalk, and we want to try to separate them so that they can both cross the road safely. We're also proposing to relocate the bus stop a bit more to the south. Again, what we noticed was that when the people get off the bus, they tend to cross at that point, Bronson, and we want to try to bring them closer to Brewer Way so they'll walk to the intersection and cross at the traffic signal. So when we look at the proposed future measures, and again, this is very conceptual. The plan is to go and work on this next year and to come up with a detailed design. But one of the things that we identified was the fact that cyclists are coming off the Bronson pathway. And some cyclists, what they do today, they go on the sidewalk, they use the bike lane, some try to cross Bronson, and it's not a very safe environment for them. There's no dedicated facility for them after they get off the Bronson pathway. And so this proposal is to provide a safe crossing for them to get across the road. We're also proposing to remove the off-ramps and replacing them with more of a configured T intersection, and again that's to try to reduce the speeds, because as you saw earlier, the speeds at the off ramps are between 50 and 60 kilometers an hour, and that's not a very safe environment for for pedestrians right now, so we want to try to enhance that. Now again, this is very high level. When we go through the preliminary design exercise next year, we will be working with residents who live in the area, as well as consulting with the residents who are affected with regards to their travel from the south part of the city. And this design may change a bit to ensure that we can, provide the improved pedestrian cycling environment while ensuring that we can still keep traffic moving along this very important corridor. And so other measures that we're proposing to do is an education and awareness program. Through our Safe Roads Ottawa program, we're going to be launching a Be Safe, Be Seen initiative. And in this case, we're going to work with the University of Carleton in September to educate the students, especially the new ones that are coming to Carleton for the first time, of this roadway, as well as the fact that, if they're traveling at night, if they're on their bicycle, they should have bike lights. If they're walking, they should have reflective material so they can be seen. We're also going to be piloting this year, putting flexible post delineators along the existing bike lanes. Again, here it's to separate the cycling lanes from the general public, but also we want to try to, one of the challenges along Bronson is trying to change the environment so that we can try to start seeing reduced speeds. And by putting the flexible posts there, we're thinking that this could potentially have an impact to reduce the speeds by letting the motorists know that they are moving from an environment where you're in a rural cross-section on the airport parkway into a more of an urban area. And as you move further north, even further into an urban area. It'll also provide level of segregation for cyclists. We also will be deploying speed display boards, again, to remind motorists at what the speeds they're traveling at. And so at this point, thank you, and well, I'll be happy to answer any questions after delegations.
Thank you, Mr. Landry. I think we have only one delegation at this point, though we have received a number of written submissions in favor of the report. So is Mr. Peter Brimacombe in the room? If you would like to come up to the microphone, sir, for your 5 minutes. Thank you very much. We're going to hold questions to staff since we only have one delegation, and then we can, if that's all right with everybody. Thank you, sir.
Okay. I'm Peter Brimacombe. I'm the secretary of the Hunt Club Community Organization. The Hunt Club community is located in River Ward. It's north of Hunt Club Road and south of the Hydro Corridor. The Hunt Club Community Organization opposes further restrictions on Bronson Avenue. Bronson Avenue provides our community with access to downtown and to Gatineau. For the city as a whole, it is a crucial north-south arterial route for buses, trucks, and cars. It is vital to the economy of the city as a whole. There's no alternative to Bronson Avenue. 40 years ago, I lived in Ottawa East off Main Street. Even then, all the north-south routes were at capacity. But there was a realization that these routes were vital to our economy. Bronson Avenue is an established route. Whatever restrictions you put on Bronson Avenue will negatively impact the city as a whole. There's no way around it.
Thank you very much, sir. Are there any questions for the delegation? Okay. There are no other delegations this morning, so we'll turn to committee members and councillors. And the first on the list is Councillor Chernyshenko.
Thank you very much. First, I really want to commend our staff for the work done on this project, because to do it well did require very thorough consultation, very thorough evaluation of a lot of data over the last few years. and quite a short time frame, because we did ask you to, we were recognizing that this was already a street that had a very high number of collisions, and time was of the essence. So I suppose those were the instructions that we had given you. I just want to verify some things here, because I think I don't believe there is anyone out there who is against making Bronson safer, reducing accidents, reducing fatalities. The only real issue is about, will this restrict the ability of people who need to use this road, and this is drivers we're talking about, who need to use this road as an important route. Am I right in, do you feel confident in your conclusion that these measures will not in any significant way add to the commuting time or the congestion on Bronson Avenue for a driver?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Because that was, you can also confirm for me, we as a group set as one of our criterion that we did not want to throttle, if you will, the volume on this street. Our objective was to get drivers to be respecting the speed limit and to create fewer problem crossovers for different kinds of users. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think we're best off just to see if there's any discussion on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next on the list is Councillor Wilkinson. Who seems to have stepped out of the room, so we'll put her down the list. And next is Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I, for one, think this study's been very well done. I think the important thing of not impeding traffic is one of the paramount things, but you also got to understand, we wouldn't have done the study if people were following the rules in any way, shape, or form, and they weren't. And we don't need those tragedies, and I think that engineering the safety is what we should be doing. We've done it for years on intersections that had bad results, and now we're doing it on an arterial roadway which has been to some extent abused. And I think that's it's important that we support this kind of effort, whether it's on Bronson or Beechwood or wherever, because there's lots of opportunities where the accident rate and the fatality and the pedestrian cyclist conflict with cars can be fixed up with good engineering. So I'm pleased to see this and happy to be supporting the report.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Deans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, let me just say thank you to the staff for doing this work, and clearly everyone wants our roadways to be safe, and that particular road is a real challenge because it is designated in the Transportation Master Plan as a major arterial roadway, ACA highway, and it is a main thoroughfare for drivers coming from the airport and the south end of the city into the downtown core. So the volumes are high. It's an important linkage for South Enders, whether they be in Riverside South or Manotick or Hunt Club or my ward or Barrhaven. That's an important link, and we know that. There's also a university on the west side of the road and a residential community on the east side of the road, and that creates a lot of challenges. My ultimate goal would to see some form of grade-separated pedestrian cycling linkage at some point, because that's always going to be a difficult challenge when you have high volumes of traffic and mixing that with high volumes of pedestrians and cyclists. So I understand the enormity of the challenge that you face. And I was interested in the question from Councillor Chernyshenko in your answer that this won't add to commuting time. And I'm quite happy supporting the recommendations that are here today. I think they will improve safety, and I think that's good. It's the longer term, what you were suggesting for the future, that makes me think it would affect commuting time. So when you answer that question, were you talking about the recommendations here today, or were you talking about the future as well?
I was just, from what I recall, the question, would this increase the commute times or create capacity issues? And my answer is this won't. I mean, there'll be, with the proposed future term recommendations, the traffic signal will create a stop when it'll be a pedestrian activated, so when there's a pedestrian or cyclist that is there to want to cross the street, will cause them to stop. The one thing we have to recognize, though, is that along that corridor, if they don't stop there, they'd probably be stopping at Sunnyside going in the southbound direction, or they would probably be stopping at Homewood, which is the next signal to the north. So in terms of increased delays, there probably won't be any on Bronson. I know there's some challenges with the ramps as well, and we'll be looking at that through the design next year to see how we can design something that can accommodate the traffic while minimizing the delay. So it's not going to create a situation where you're going to get gridlock. But again, that's what we'll work on next year.
So when you were talking about designing the ramp in the future coming off the canal, heading southbound on Bronson, bringing that to a T intersection, are you proposing a traffic signal there or just a pedestrian half signal?
That'll be something that we'll look at through the design. And again, it might require signalization. What we showed in our plan here was that there needs to be a crossing in this area. We didn't have enough time to go into detail to see exactly what that would be, but that would be done through the preliminary design process. And so there's options that we can look at, but our ultimate goal is to ensure that we can provide safe crossing for pedestrians and cyclists while ensuring that we can continue to keep the traffic moving, because we don't want to be in a situation where you design something that creates backups and increases the hazard for everybody.
Right.
So that's where we're going to be working towards next year. And we'll be consulting with residents in the area as well as residents in the south, and to ensure that we find that balance.
And I appreciate that. I think it's very important that you highlighted in the report that you will be consulting residents, users of that particular facility as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I was interested in this is, I have no problem with what you want to do in the immediate term. I think it will help a little bit. But there is a question of how much it's going to cost with the future one. And I looked in the report to see if I could find that. And all it says is that future countermeasures recommended in 2014 and 2015 will be subject to council and future capital budget submissions, etc. And then I considered, what are the priorities? There are other parts of the city which have similar problems, and we're just starting to do the master transportation plan. So one of my questions is, will the master transportation plan try to take a look at some of the areas where we do have serious problems and fatalities happening with pedestrians, and try to give us some sort of a priority list, just as we do with building roads and fixing bridges and everything else? Is that going to be part of the master transportation plan, so that we don't sometimes have a very bad incident happens and it tends to push things to the top because it's current, whereas others, which if similar problems get then pushed down?
I think Ms. Chi is in a better position to answer that question related to the master plan.
Actually, Chair, the TMP doesn't, we don't have to rely on the TMP for that. If there's a safety situation that's becoming critical, it's addressed automatically, immediately. And that's through Mr. Landry's group with his safety program. So you don't have to wait for the TMP to identify those things, because these things come up. And the TMP is addressed and modified every 5 years.
Well, that's interesting, because I know there was one out in Canada where there was a fatality, and it's a very dangerous situation every single day. Thousands of people crossing every day, 8 lanes of traffic, going at 80 kilometers an hour, and that wasn't given a priority. So how do we go about creating the priorities on safety issues? Because that is really, and that's not the only, I'm sure there are others in the city as well.
One of the things we're doing, and if you recall a few years ago, we brought forward a report on the pedestrian safety program, and it was a pilot project. And one of the things in that, through that program is what you mentioned, is ranking, where should we be doing studies to improve and enhance pedestrian safety. So we're working on that, and we're going to be bringing back some information to committee later in the year that could talk to those things. But again, the challenge with, especially when it comes to pedestrian and cycling incidents is, and it's good news, is that, there are occurrences, but they're very far and few between when you compare that to vehicles where we have over 15,000 collisions. So it's very difficult to use the techniques we use when we're looking at, from a safety perspective, vehicle collisions, because we have the numbers there to sort of show where the problems are. So one of the things with our program, and we utilize it in this instance, was we want to go and talk to the residents who use those intersections, because a lot of times you'll have a lot of near misses, but you won't have the actual collisions. So by listening to the residents to get their feedback on where are the intersections that, from your perspective, aren't safe. So you may think that an intersection is not safe. We'll go back and look at the traffic data and show that there's been no collisions, but we may go out there and see that there's something that we can do to try to reduce that conflict. And that's the challenge that we face with when we look at pedestrians and cyclists.
Well, I wasn't just thinking of cars. This was pedestrians, and one was killed and another's hit. So it's not a different situation, really, when you get down to it. So I know we did the safety audit, but this doesn't seem to have gone anywhere. So it is coming back, later this year?
Yeah, that's the plan. And again, it was a pilot because of we wanted to test out the tool that we developed.
I'm not speaking against this one. I'm just thinking we need.
And so we're gonna come back at some point later to provide information on how the 3 years went and potentially how we'd move forward with continuing with this program. Because from our perspective, we think it's a very valuable program to have. And we'll be looking at options too.
I agree with you on that one. Next year, you're going to be doing the design. So, is that being done in-house, or is that how is that being funded?
It'll be done through and the programs. This intersection will be funded through the new traffic control signal program, because of the amount of cyclists and pedestrians that would be crossing. It would meet the warrants for a signal, so we're funding it through that program. So next year we'll be asking for funds to do the preliminary design, and usually that's done through a consultant that comes in and does the engineering perspective, but we're also going to be doing like I mentioned, the consultation, and then based on what the costs are that they're developed for that. At this point, the costs that we've identified for the signal and the roadway modifications are around $400,000 to $500,000, but again, that's a very high level estimate based on just sort of what we've looked at this point. We would refine that, and then we would make the request in the 2015 budget, similar to what we do with other locations where we install traffic signals for funding.
How much would the design work cost, roughly?
Usually around $60,000.
So it's
in that range.
Okay, fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Landry, for the report. It's very, very good. Two questions for you. One comes out of Councillor Wilkinson's comments regarding the earlier incident in Eagleson where there was also a fatality. That intersection was studied along with several others in the area, and there's some improvements recommended. Can you confirm that those will get done this year?
Yes, those will be done this year.
Okay, thank you. And also, as the representative from the River Road or River Ward Community Association mentioned, there are other north-south arterials that are carrying a lot of volumes. There's also other similar streets around town that have the volumes, such as Eagleson, and I would put Hunt Club in this mix as well. Should we be looking at, like I've seen some recent reports such as Downtown Moves where they talk about putting bike lanes and pedestrians on every single street. Should we actually be looking, or maybe we are, and you can confirm this for me, taking streets such as Bronson and maybe because of the university and everything, that would be a street where we would have a lot of pedestrians, but also look for some streets where we don't have to mix the bicycle and the pedestrian and the cars together, so that we can still move the same kinds of volumes or prepare for the growth in the future of the volumes of vehicle traffic? Is that for Vivi?
Yes, Councillor, that's what we would try to look at, and we're looking at those issues as part of the TMP. But with Complete Streets, we are looking at all users in the right-of-way, and if there are opportunities or options to move and use multi-use pathways off-road. We look at all those things as part of the whole network planning.
So So we are not looking at trying to put bikes and pedestrians on all our big streets. That's confirmed?
It's actually, we're looking at where people are, through the OD survey, where are people going, where are their destinations, and trying to provide the facilities that would accommodate those movements in a safe manner, and also looking at the volumes and demands. So we're dealing with a whole bunch of different criteria, and we assess them that way.
Okay, because for Canada, for example, we tend to move our pedestrians and bicycles away from the main roads and other pathways, so I'll start seeing reports here at the city suggesting doing that elsewhere?
It's really contextual, so it depends on the location and what other factors are all around. But the emphasis is looking on safe movement and mobility for all users of the road, and if that means it's in the right-of-way and that's possible and it's affordable, then that will be done. If there's no opportunity and a better choice is to be off-road, then that would be looked at as well. But I can't say that this is it would be a blanket statement that we would move away from one approach or another.
Okay, then maybe what you can give me a level of confidence with by telling me that you're also factoring in the vehicle volumes and the potential for growth of that, recognizing that we are always going to have cars on these roads coming from Councillor Dean's ward, Councillor McRae's and mine and many others around the city. There will always be the need for cars.
We do recognize that through the results of the OD survey, and if there are changes to the way we do things, certainly they would come before you, committee and council, for approval or decision. So that any changes would be coming forward to you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Boyles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of points, and I do agree with what Councillor Clark said about if we can design and do the engineering to make our roads safer, we should be doing so. And I think the challenge that we have and that you have is trying to find that balance between, what's in the budget, what's affordable, and what needs to be done. Unfortunately, sometimes I think we miss the big picture, and I think Councillor Wilkinson was hitting on that portion of the equation where we react to one-offs. And in this case, we're reacting to a one-off, and we sort of forget what the actual cause was. So I'm taking at face value the report that says, you know what, we have an unsafe stretch here. And there have been incidents and everything else, let's fix it. And I don't think anybody's going to disagree with the report. But there is a bigger picture out there, and when Ms. Chi says that, well, we don't wait for the TMP once we identify unsafe situations, but I get a feeling we don't identify them, and I know you're going to disagree with me, but we don't really identify them until an incident happens. And then we're sitting here and we say, how do we deal with this? Give us a report, and then we get this report and we move forward. But in the meantime, every one of us has community meetings where unsafe situations get brought up, and you've attended a few sessions where, and the first thing that somebody says is, are you going to wait till somebody gets killed? And I'm sitting up there going, or standing up there going, well, what's my answer? Well, the answer isn't, yes, we're going to wait till somebody gets killed. We take a look at it and we try to fix it. But between what we're doing here and between the big picture, are we missing the boat somewhere along the way? Like, is there a better way of doing this and addressing this before things happen?
Yeah, and that's a challenge, and we're working on that as well. One of the things that we want to do is do what we call network screening, and so it's looking at all the collisions and trying to see if there's trends, and do we see locations where there's overrepresentation of certain types of collisions. So, like in this case, when we looked at the cycling, and the fact that in September there's more collisions on this corridor than what you would find for the rest of the city. So we're working on those type of things so that we can, again, instead of being reactive, trying to be more proactive. The challenge becomes, like I mentioned earlier, with pedestrians and cyclists, the data is very small compared. So you may have 1 or 2 or 3 collisions at an intersection for a pedestrian, and that may not give you a pattern. And that's where we need to work with the communities to talk to them to say, what are you feeling when you're using that intersection? Because they're the ones that use it every day. It's not, we'll come in and do a study and evaluate, but we're not there every day seeing these near misses and all the other issues that come up. So we are working on it through trying to be more proactive, but again, it is a challenge to do that. So.
With respect to the, let's say, the financial implications, and I must admit, a lot of times when I read a report, I go to the back and I work my way backwards. And I start off with the financial implications, and of course you basically talked about these countermeasures recommended 2014, 2015 will be submitted for future capital budgets, which didn't really give us a picture of what's the magnitude here. Now you did verbally, and I'm still trying to understand, though, you're stretching it out over 2 years, the 2014 budget and the 2015 budget, which in effect means if we've agreed that there's an unsafe situation, we're really prolonging it over a couple of years. Why would we not do it all in one shot in one year?
The challenge we have is that we've got multiple demands for especially in the signal program, and so our practice is for locations that require roadway modifications, so like in this case, we would ask for funding in the first year to do a preliminary design, and what that does, it gives us time to do the design as well as to refine our costs, so that when we go back the following year, we can ask for funds that provide us exactly what we need, because we've got more locations that meet warrants for traffic signals than actually we have funds to fund.
Yeah, no, I know that's the dilemma that we
exactly.
So balancing act.
So one of the things we do through the program though, and if in this case there was no roadway modifications required, then we would ask for the whole funding in the first year, and we do that as well. So we first look at those locations that require no roadway modifications. If we would then recommend those to be done the first year. Anything that's got design work, we would ask for design the first year and implementation the second year.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I believe Councillor Clark would like back on the list.
Uh-oh. No, they don't wait till somebody gets killed, although it might seem that way. We still have the intersection improvement program. We still evaluate the 10 worst intersections every year and look at how we might improve them to reduce the accident rate. Well, I think it's just an unfair comment, and I thought I'd respond to it. I think we need to watch the committee room in case somebody gets killed in here for hoof and mouth disease or whatever it was.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chernushenko.
Yes, if we are at the point where I might sum up, I guess I would check if there are other questions from...
I actually had a question for staff.
And I'll wait.
If just building on some of the comments that Councillor Blois made about stretching it out. My understanding from the report is that the immediate measures that you're putting into place, like the cycling barriers and the road signs and pavement markings, that sort of thing, that was meant to alleviate some of the concern in that intervening period and to bring a level of safety to the stretch of road. Is that not accurate?
Yes.
And those are things you can do as soon as we give you the go-ahead today. Those are things you can get onto right away, correct?
That's right. We'll be doing that in the next month once we get the pavement marking crews up and running.
Okay, thank you. And again, thank you very much for the report. I fully support it. Councillor Chernushenko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Allow me to sum up really with, it would be easy, in fact, too easy to look at what we're doing here today or over the last number of months on Bronson as simply a response to one death, as tragic as Krista Johnson's death was last fall. In fact, I would see it this way. Bronson has been a challenging street. I know we're always warned by our lawyers not to say a dangerous street, but certainly one that feels dangerous to everyone for more than a decade. Since that bulge was created, narrow Airport Parkway, big bulge through what ends up being part of my ward, and then narrows again going through the glebe. That stretch is a problem. That stretch is too fast. All of the engineering, our own human Our eyes tell us lots of space, it's straight, go fast. The end result is limited reaction time when something does happen and crossovers at very high speeds. When we hear that the on and off ramps are 50 or 60 kilometer an hour crossovers, that means a cyclist and a pedestrian is encountering a car and vice versa at 50 to 60 kilometers an hour, and that is quite simply not a safe condition. What we are doing here is finally, I would put it that way, finally, after several attempts over more than a decade, to make Bronson safer and calmer, we're taking some significant steps. Could we have done even more? Yes, but then we start getting into the feared repercussions for volume, for commuting time, for congestion. And again, for my ward, for my very own community, the moment we start getting into serious congestion on Bronson, we get cut through traffic. I would be the very last person who would be advocating steps on this stretch of Bronson that would be driving more people to cut through Old Ottawa South and the Glebe, because guess who would be hearing about it? And guess who would actually be experiencing it on his own street? So that was an important lens through which all of this work was done. Please, for everyone, this is not an urban versus suburban and rural situation. I do thank the delegate for coming out. I've seen letters from people who are concerned that this will be throttling traffic from the south. Our challenge is to make sure that it's not. While secretly I might like Bronson to become nothing but a cycle path, that's not going to happen, and I know it's not going to happen. It is what it is. How do we make it calmer and safer for all users? And that's what really this was about too. We heard from many drivers, both drivers from further outside the central core of the city and from lots of drivers inside who we must remember, I drive that street too. Residents of my ward also drive it. So we equally want to make sure we're not stuck when we're heading out to the airport. We're not stuck when we're coming back from the airport or our workplace to the south as well. So it's not as if there is one group saying, I want to get all cars off of Bronson. No, we recognize this has to be a balanced approach. If there's any doubt about the numbers, I just got the recent traffic-related offenses yesterday afternoon. In this past year, there have been 239 speeding offenses at the corner of Bronson Avenue and Brewer Way. That's where we are directing Carleton University students and staff and children going to day camp, and they're not just from my ward, they're from everyone's ward, to be crossing there. 239 speeders, and those are on the days when our police were able to be there, and most days they're not. So what is that telling us? 136 at Sunnyside Avenue, and then for the rest of Bronson, the numbers absolutely plummet. So you look at these numbers and they say, wow, that stretch that we're addressing here today is way, way above all other numbers on Bronson Avenue. That's something serious. Since January 1st, 69 speeding offenses at that same corner of Bronson and Sunnyside, and then it drops down to 17 on other parts of Bronson. There is a reason why we're here today. It isn't just Krista Johnson, it's everybody who uses Bronson. And I thank staff, my colleagues, for working together on this. I look forward to working with you on the similar situations you may be encountering in your ward. Thank you.
Thank you. So on the report received? Received. Thank you very much. The next matter is the item number 4, the Glebe Local Area Parking Study. We don't have a staff presentation on this, but I believe we have a delegation. Is Ms. Linda Hode in the room? I'm sorry. Sorry. Moving too far ahead. Scott DeMarc, please. Good morning. Thank you for coming down. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I am Scott DeMarc. I live at 125 3rd Avenue, 2 doors down from the proposed parking garage. Obviously, I got interested because it's beside me, but in looking at it more thoroughly, I was looking at the report. And in the report that Lindsay Thomas authored, I see that it concludes it would normally be recommended that the construction of the parking garage at 170 2nd Avenue be deferred until the need for the facility has been demonstrated. And yet, and then it goes on, and it gives 1.5 or so pages of recommendations for ways to mitigate parking needs without building a garage. However, I see in what's before the committee today that the recommendation is to proceed with construction. So it seems like there's a disconnect there between what the engineers are telling us and what the committee is recommending. In our official plan, we refer to the Transportation Master Plan. You're all very familiar with that, which includes themes of minimizing costs, keeping livable neighborhoods, and making efficient use of existing infrastructure. In all those cases, it would appear that the 1.5 pages that are in the report do a very nice job of summarizing how we can do that. Yet, I see that there's only one of those recommendations coming towards you today to look at. So my request of council will be to look at this, to evaluate the impacts of these changes, these mitigation strategies, before looking to build. The second point I'd like to make is about cost benefit. I work in development in the City of Ottawa. I spend a lot of my time doing pro formas for developments on lots and infills. I do a lot of financial analysis for this kind of thing. This pro forma just simply doesn't make sense. When you look at even a rudimentary analysis of the demand that the parking study gives you and the cost that you can charge for parking, this is going to cost taxpayers money for decades based on the analysis. Now, if it is simply about event parking, then you can make an argument for it. So if Lansdowne needs overflow parking, we can put it there. It's logical, and you can see the argument, the economic argument. But I didn't think the point of the Lansdowne project was to put parking at 3rd and Bank. Lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about due process. This is probably the NIMBY part of my argument, is that this will overlook my property. And so if council is to recommend going forward with a garage, I think it's really important that it be in keeping with the neighborhood. Again, because I work in development, I've spent a lot of time in front of the Urban Design Review Panel, in heritage hearings, etc. But I've been informed that this project won't be subject to either of those reviews. So Mary Gracie has informed me that neither the Urban Design Review Panel nor the Heritage Committee will have any say about this project. And I think that's disappointing, given the nature and the importance of the site. Our own ward councillor has identified the need to make it beautiful if it's going to be there, and yet we're bypassing two important steps in that process that the City of Ottawa puts. So I would ask that if it is going to pass today, that we ask for due process and have the city face the same sort of scrutiny that a private developer would face. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Kevin O'Donnell in the room? Sorry, were there any questions for the delegation before we move to Mr. O'Donnell? Yes? Councillor Chern.
But thank you for presenting, Scott. And as you know, we share a background of interest in sustainable development and alternative transportation. So as you know, the very last person that you would have expected to be proposing and supporting a parking garage is me. But as might come out in the discussion, yes, you have highlighted aspects of the report that would lean away. There are some that lean towards. I just wanted to indicate to you a commitment that even if there is no mandatory reviews or some of these processes, that from me to you and the community, we would absolutely be carrying out public consultations, input into the design process, etc. I realize it's not quite the same thing, but that there would be a real, genuine opening from the very beginning to give input into heights, appearance, use, entrances, exits, public space around it, etc. So perhaps that's definitely more a comment than a question for the delegation.
Thank you, Councillor Chernyshenko. Mr. O'Donnell. Good morning. Thanks for coming down, and you have 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Mr. Chair, councillors, thank you for your time. I'm here to speak in favor of Recommendation 2, staff's recommendation that the city adopt a single citywide on-street parking policy that ties parking fees to a supply and demand system. Staff have provided an excellently researched rationale for why such a system is fair, inexpensive, and very effective. So I encourage you to vote yes on Recommendation 2 and direct staff to research how Ottawa could implement such a system as soon as possible. I'm also here to speak against Recommendations 3 and 4, so a kind of a division on the motion. which would result in an $8 million being spent on a parking garage that our professional transportation staff have concluded we do not need at this time. Our staff have concluded that an up-to-date parking study, and with the conclusion that the garage is not needed until 2031. Now, there's no question that the Lansdowne redevelopment will impact the parking situation in the glebe, but $8 million is a lot to spend on the chance that we'll need it sooner than 2031. Maybe we will still need a garage, but perhaps until 2025 or maybe 2020. Either way, I think it's prudent to wait, and the city can use that $8 million for things that we know we need today, instead of on things we might need in the future. So I encourage you to divide and vote no on recommendations 3 and 4. In general, the simple truth is parking is a challenging problem. People are conditioned to expect parking right at their destination, in front of a business or their own home, or within one block, which is a distance that's close enough to feel close enough, not far away. When spots are not available, psychological frustration grows the further away someone has to go to find parking. It's a human condition, and it's one I suffer from as much as anyone else. If my preferred parking space for my bike was not available on the north side of City Hall, I would have been frustrated to have to walk a little further to park my bike. It's just something that afflicts all of us. So it's kind of irrational, but it's very predictable, and I'm here to encourage you to follow the very rational advice that's contained in the staff report that the garage is not needed at this time. When the supply of available spots drops below 15 or 10%, as staff address in the report, two things happen. People perceive that the situation is hopeless, and they begin to park illegally and dangerously, blocking fire hydrants, parking too close to intersections, and generally, which isn't a situation we want. And also the demand for the creation of new parking supply comes out. And I think probably everyone has heard about the need for more parking. The problem is creating more supply at a price that's too low doesn't get us anywhere. The new parking will fill up, and we return to the current situation, and we're $8 million short of where we started. Businesses are still frustrated that their clients are complaining that they couldn't find parking, and that's reflected in the consultation results. I think about half of the BIA members reported that they would like parking to be cheaper, and also enforcement rates to be lowered. With respect, that's something of an absurd position. If the city followed that direction, it guarantees there would be no empty spots in the glebe ever, anywhere, at any time, and customer complaints would continue. The survey shows that the major complaint is actually the unavailability of parking. Customers' first complaint to the businesses was, I couldn't find a place to park, not I couldn't find a place to park for free or for only a nickel for an hour. When the city follows through on recommendation 2 and adopts a demand-priced parking system, customers will find that there is always a spot available on that block, perhaps the next block. That psychological frustration is lowered. Now, the price that they're willing to pay will reflect the demand for parking. But in those high turnover rates, the dry cleaner always needs a spot close by because people just want to drop in, get their stuff and go. The parking rate for a day might be high, but for that half an hour might be low enough. And it would also even out the parking demand as prices drop off, say in the North Glebe, and this is applicable to any neighborhood, Westboro as well. So my recommendation to you is to proceed with recommendation 2 and direct staff to formulate that citywide demand-priced policy, and also defer recommendations 3 and 4 until we know the full impact of Lansdowne, and also until we know the effect that demand-based pricing in the glebe would have on the need for the garage as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the delegation? Okay, thank you very much. Is Jasna Jennings in the room? Yep, please come on down.
Am I supposed to be speaking? I was actually going to speak to item number 2, but I believe there's going to be a discussion about item number 2, so I'm happy to leave it at that. Sorry, recommendation.
Recommendation number 2. Okay, fine.
Am I good? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
If comments are required, I'm happy to stay.
Okay, thank you. And I believe Councillor Blois, you had a question for staff?
Well, I have a couple of questions, but the first one deals with recommendation number 2. It does seem kind of strange the way it's positioned in here. Even to go forward and do a study, we have a contract, I believe. We signed a contract with respect to parking revenues, and I can stand corrected on this, that either has a formula for the return to the city, like the revenue that's returned to the city, or how much the contractor gets. How does that fit in here?
It should not impact negatively that contract. If we were to go with demand-based pricing, is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yes, it would not negatively impact that contract.
Okay, what does that mean? That means, do we get more money, we get less money? Does the contractor get a bigger cut?
I don't believe, as Mary said, there we don't have. Oh, sorry. Pardon? The contract is already set on the number of parking meters we have. And the number and the amount of revenue that's generated will come out of the contract. But it's based on the service of the machines, and then the revenue is.
Sorry,
is
it's based on the what?
On the number of machines and the number of lots.
Yeah. Okay, my recollection is, and I haven't pulled up the report where we approved the, when all the new machines came in, that there is a formula there in terms of what's returned to the city. If we change the way revenue is generated, and part of the premise was when we approved something, it's on a premise that this is the amount of revenue the city will expect to receive. Now, I know projections can be off. We know what happened with Orga World, but when we start changing the contract, and that's probably, how long has that been now? A year and a half, 2 years, or something like this? It hasn't been very long. If we start changing that, what kind of a legal dilemma do we get into?
I apologize. The contract for the pay and display is there's a fixed revenue guarantee in that contract. Okay. So that's set at 25% over the base that was set in 2010. So those provisions will still stay in place. So and it will depend on the amount of revenue generated, what percentage of that 25 that will have to be recouped. Or if we meet that demand, then the contract will stay.
Okay, so if and when this comes forward, I'm sure there will be a legal provision or whatever the legal implications are for us, because we know what happens when you start changing contracts after the fact. The other element deals with the garage, and I must admit, similar to the first presenter, when I read that the garage wasn't expected to be needed until 2013, and yet this report points out that we've already approved this as part of our 2013 business plan, and we've approved the parking operations maintenance development business plan allocation with $8 million. Are we not doing this the cart before the horse here? Like, this report almost doesn't seem to need to be before us for the garage.
The reason the local area parking study was initiated was the direction from council in 2010 to review the need for the Glebe garage as part of the discussions. And we initiated the program, or the investigation, or the report was prepared last year, and that's the results are what we provided today.
Right. And for clarification, the parking reserve fund where this money would come from to build the garage, is that purely funded from parking revenues?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Fleury.
I do have a question to staff relating to one of the presenters earlier that spoke about the design review feature of the parking building. As you know, we're conducting an analysis of the Byward Market, and one of the consultants commented publicly around the challenge that our existing building in the market is. I wouldn't want to share that with my colleague from the Glebe, so I want to make sure that whatever we design is conscious of budget, but is also representative of the area. So I'm wondering, from one angle, are we going to submit it to some form of review in terms of design? And the second aspect is, have we thought of putting commercial on the ground floor to maybe mitigate some of the aspects of the parking lot?
Answer to the first question is yes, we'll be taking the design concepts back to the community to review, and with the Ward Council, we've met with the BIAs, we met with the community associations, we had an open house, and we're also working with the Lansdowne Transportation Advisory Group, so we've been fairly active, very, very active in promoting the concept, and we will do the same thing when we get to the design plan for that, or conceivable design concepts. The second question...
or around a ground floor commercial.
Yes. The second question, yes, we did look at that as a concept. The problem was the amount of cost that would incur and the timelines to incorporate that into the design was a problem.
Sorry, I didn't hear the amount of what?
The timelines to do the construction with that concept in place, and then the cost to do the construction would have been impacted beyond the budget.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of questions, Mr. O'Keefe, before we wrap up. And the first one has to deal with, there's a bit of a theme here about the need for the parking garage. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that. Are you comfortable and substantive standing in front of us today saying that the parking garage should be built and it should be built now?
The consideration that we did, the report looked at the needs just based on parking. It didn't take into review the impacts of the development that's happening in the area and the need that's coming from intensification, and plus the demand for more long-term parking availability. A lot of the BIAs are looking for employee parking. The school board in the area is looking at developing reducing their parking for development. So there is a need over and above just what we've studied. We expect there will be pressures coming in the medium term. The timeline to do the construction now would allow us to be in advance of the demand. If we wait, then the demand will force us to try and catch up.
So in other words, what you're recommending to us at this point is to be proactive.
That's correct.
And the other issue that's come up somewhat is that the parking garage versus the variable rate of parking, that it's an either-or scenario, and maybe, I don't see it that way from your report, but maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, I apologize for that misunderstanding, but you are correct. The recommendation 2 is not linked to the need for the parking garage. It was a request to look at that as a separate issue.
Okay. I believe, Councillor Hubel, you have a comment or a request of the committee?
I do. I'd like to call for yeas and nays on recommendation 2 of this report.
And you're comfortable with us voting on the balance of the report separate as a package?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'll start with Councillor Wilkinson.
Yeah. I understand that number 2 sort of is not right in this one, but if we voted nay, I think it's something that somewhere along the line we need to look at. And I was wondering if we just shouldn't send it back to staff for a longer-term look at it, because I'm not talking about this area, but there are other areas in the city where I think this could be very useful. Could even handle things like the problem of parking in the evenings in the Byward Market by sort of extending the time you pay, but making it a lower rate in a longer period of time or something, so that you actually get the turnover that we don't get right now. There's all sorts of things we can do with a program like that, but it's something that's going to take a year or 2 to study and to get it done properly. It has nothing to do with the parking garage. It's in the wrong place. So I'm wondering rather, if we vote against it, does that then, with staff, mean you can't look at it? Or should we be sending it back to staff to say over the long term it should be considered but not a priority?
I mean, I'm happy to hear from staff and the clerk's department if necessary, or legal, but I don't think by voting today on this particular matter it means it can never be looked at again. Can you clarify?
We have mechanisms to open discussions through the Greater Ottawa Business Improvement Association, through our parking stakeholders group, through different mechanisms. We can open the discussions. The intent of this recommendation was to start discussions on options, and we still have mechanisms to do that, and we can proceed and with individual BIAs if needed.
Well, I'd like the legal opinion on it, too, Mr. Chair.
Yes, through the chair, we can revisit this as well, and this does not hamper us from looking at it from a different aspect under a different program, as the General Manager just spoke.
Thank you very much, Councillor.
Then I'm quite happy with that. We can take it out of this one. I don't think this is the right place, but I just would like to make sure the direction to staff is that they don't not look at it, because it is something that's being looked at across the province.
And I think Mr. O'Keefe indicated that there are plenty of avenues where it can still be looked at.
But I think if we just let them know that we actually want them to look at it, it does help. As a direction, that's all.
Okay, Councillor Blois first, and then Councillor Fleury, I believe.
Yeah, just so my earlier comments aren't misunderstood, I actually think there's a benefit in looking at time of use pricing, and whether it's with hydro, whether it's with parking rates, whatever. It just, as I said, it seemed bizarre to be planted in this report here, but I do think it's something worthwhile to go forward and look at. So if it comes to a separate vote, I would be voting yes. But we did have a delegation that came forward that wanted to speak on this, and I have no idea what she wanted to say. But I think we basically sent her back to the gallery because she had the impression that this was somehow going to fall off the table, and I may be wrong. Maybe I'm not reading her mind properly. But if that were the case, I think, first of all, you should have her come back up and speak to this, and then we can do the separate vote. But I would be quite happy to send a direction to staff saying, yeah, go look at this and see how this works. And if it gives us a better management tool for parking, especially in those areas like the market and the glebe, that where parking is tighter, let's look at it. Let's move forward. But my only concern was the legal ramifications of the contract that we've signed. So,
I think that was a good question. And I have absolutely no difficulty if Ms. Jennings wants to come forward and say what she intended to say in the first place. That's more than fine, and be available for questions.
Morning. Sorry about the confusion.
No problem. I think it was mostly us and not you, so please carry on. Thanks very much.
Yasna Jennings from the Byward Market BIA. I was speaking with the councillor. I thought the item was going to be pulled from this particular discussion. I had a discussion with Larry O'Keefe as well. I sit on, I represent the Byward Market BIA. I also sit on the Parking Stakeholder Committee group, I think we're called, and of course the Ottawa Council of BIAs. So my comments were really somewhat like Councillor Blois, that it was odd to see a citywide recommendation attached to a area-specific report, and that really I wanted to see if this recommendation was approved, that there would be some kind of direction attached to it, saying that it had to go back to Parking Stakeholder Committee for discussion, to the Ottawa Council BIA for discussion, and certainly we want to be at that table, because I think there needs to be some kind of a terms of reference, guidelines around, what are the kind of the pressure points that determine whether we go up or down, change time limits, so on. But there's definitely, I think, room for discussion on the topic.
Yeah, thank you very much. Are there any questions for the delegation? Yes, Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned to send it back to the Council of BIAs. Across the city, not every area that would be impacted by such a policy is covered by a BIA. So one of my concerns with that approach, and what Mr. O'Keefe said earlier, is that we are leaving out some of the city in the decisions that will affect them. So would you agree that maybe we're better off looking at what I would want to recommend here is more clearer direction to staff, because this was originally asked for 3 years ago in the previous council in 2010, and this is how far we got. These studies cost us money, cost the taxpayers money, so I would like to see it a little more clear, the terms that we're looking for here, and a little wider consultation so that anybody going to be impacted by it has a chance to participate. Could you support that?
Oh, absolutely. And maybe for clarification, the Council of BIAs, I can't really speak on it because we haven't spoken to it as a group, but it's certainly going to affect several. But the Parking Stakeholder Committee also has a really wide representation of the city. But absolutely, I mean, parking affects the whole city, and it also takes into account a lot of different departments. A lot of departments kind of have their fingers in that pie, so we really need to make sure that there's a really clear, clear guidelines as to where we want to go and how we want to look at it. But absolutely, I'd support that.
Good. Thank you.
Councillor Fleury.
Good old parking. No, to me, it's not to delegation. Good old parking, eh? We have the ability locally to work with staff and get the changes implemented. There's a lot of benefits to it. There's a lot of impacts to it. So I think there's value into that, but I'm not, I'm in the mind like Councillor Blois on this is we need to, and Councillor Wilkinson, we need to leave the door open to other alternatives. We need to work with the stakeholders, the BIAs for the specific areas in terms of what does that mean for the businesses, for residents. So I'm confused about this report specifically on why recommendation 2 is in the report, and my question to committee or to staff on this would be, can we pull the recommendation 2 without a vote and have that analysis come at a different time? Because to me, the delegation was quite right in saying it's a local issue, the parking lot, and this one is more of a citywide discussion. So I don't see that they're linked. I'm wondering if committee would be amenable to pulling recommendation 2 without necessarily having a vote and allowing staff to test it.
Councillor
I
Clark.
say move to table recommendation 2 and provide direction. You can do that.
I appreciate I can do that. I'm not convinced that we have unanimity around the table as to what that direction should be.
We do, I think.
I think we should hear from Councillor Chernyshenko as it's within his ward and most directly affects him before we
Sure.
call a vote.
I'd be glad to on excuse me, on this one. I then have a question. When we get back to the main thrust of this report, I can see why it is in this report, but would prefer it not be for the reasons that have been mentioned by others. It is a tool that could be effectively used in the glebe to deal with the traffic issues we have. However, coming as it is attached to this parking garage report, it is bigger than that. It's more important than that. It deserves more discussion than that, even though it may end up coming back as a useful tool. So I would support tabling it, having it come back to us for a much more thorough discussion, getting input from others, and are moving forward on making a decision on this report minus that recommendation.
Thank you for that. As the most affected councillor in terms of the actual report, if not necessarily that recommendation, that was helpful. So, Councillor Flory, you're going to formally table it then? Yes. Okay. And we'll call the vote on that particular issue. All in favor of tabling the carried. Councillor Shenko, do you have further comments on the balance of the report?
Yes, please. Well, first of all, a question for staff. Ms. Gracie, you and I have been at this for a number of months, if not years now. It was one of the very first items that came to me as a newly elected councillor. There's this parking garage that was already voted on to build. How would you like to go about it? We decided, I felt, and it was generally accepted, that understanding the parking situation better rather than just simply forging ahead with a garage that had momentum behind it. Quite simply, for everybody's reminder, you take 2,000 spots away from Lansdowne, adding 100 back in a few blocks away. It's hard to argue against the need to add a little more supply when you're taking away that much of the existing supply. But what I have to ask you is about the methodology here. As I understood it, you've explained this to me and others a number of times. You are not able to study and essentially use a forecast of what Lansdowne might do. You're only able to study what the current parking conditions are on the ground right now, not to gaze into a crystal ball, if I were to put it that way. How could you best describe it?
For the projections, for the forecast for parking demand, we looked at a broad range of indicators. We looked at population projections, we looked at transit modal split, and we looked at intensification. And we took all of those into account. We did look at Lansdowne, but we used the parking study that's already been done that shows the day-to-day needs of Lansdowne can be accommodated, and we set that aside. With the remaining projections, all those different indicators, we found that in the future, the low projection is that overall parking supply will be 85% used to 95% used. And at that high end, you will need additional capacity.
So if I can not put words in your mouth, ask you to correct me if I'm wrong here. Essentially what we can do is acknowledge that the parking study for Lansdowne said the streets around it can handle the day-to-day demand. Major events, that's a whole other issue. We're trying to get to people to not come by car, but the day-to-day, going shopping, going to the theater, playing in the park, local streets can accommodate it. However, what then is almost certain to happen is a ripple effect. Those streets that, quote, can handle it will now be much more full, if not completely full, for the day-to-day shoppers who are accustomed to coming and frequenting the businesses from Glebe Avenue through to 4th or 5th. They're now going to be pushed back up north because the spots closer to where they might want to have gone are now full. They'll be going further north. That's where this garage comes in, because it was a need identified by the businesses and by the customers that if all of the spaces anywhere near Lansdowne are going to be taken, there's got to be something further north. That's essentially what this garage, the role it could play, in addition to some of the other off-peak users, possible school teachers in the expansion and much more. Late night, this past winter, again, snow plowing. But, Councillor, where do I put my car when those signs go in the ground saying no parking on street? There were a number of ways in which we could use this garage, even if they're outside of what our policy points us to build for. I apologize, that really wasn't the question, was it? Was there anything in what I said that was wrong?
All of it.
Can I take silence as a no? All right, thank you. Unless there are other questions, do you want me to sum up here, or do we see other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was your summary, but in any event, Councillor Tierney would like to speak to the matter very briefly that we just tabled, not to change it in any way, but just to add a bit of direction to staff.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I agree with this motion that's going forward, but if I can ask direction to staff, if they can include some numbers. Look, when you know how IT works, the cost of administration sometimes outweigh the benefit of increasing a price on a fare. Can we have some of those numbers included? If it costs more to go and change these meters every second day for an increased fare to be able to satisfy a community that needs that parking, it might cost us more in the end. So if we can look at those staff numbers specifically to the administration and the modification of those costs, that'd be great.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chernyshenko.
Yes. You're right, that was mostly my sum up. I have just one more point I want to raise as we go towards a vote or possibly carry this. It was put this way, as yet again I was saying to the Community Association, the tired line you've now heard, the last person you'd expect to be arguing for parking is me. And here is a young woman who does everything by bicycle, and she said, with a straight face, why don't we just give it another name? Let's call it something like a mobility hub. And that might sound like it's just semantics or trying to gloss over it, but when we talked about it some more, she was really onto something. You call it a parking garage, it's that big ugly one that you've got stuck in the Byward Market, the old style of building a parkade. You call it something else, you think of it as something else, and you design it to be something else, it can be that. Yes, of course, it will accommodate somewhere in the range of 150 cars, but there's a severe shortage of bicycle parking during certain periods. There is a lack, virtue car sharing schemes have difficulty finding enough spaces to put those cars as well. Electric charging, yes, it's in its infancy, but we're going to see more of that. We begin thinking of this as a mobility hub, and we think it, when we imagine it designed well, fitting into the community, the context of the buildings around it, and when we look at the important issues to residents of access, egress, safety issues, possibility to design in some gathering places just back off of Bank Street, the benches, etc., a slightly quieter place, then it can be something more and better and more valuable to the community than just a parkade. And that's why I support it. Thank you.
And now we're summed up? Excellent. So can we call the vote on the remaining recommendations in the report? Carried. Thank you very much. The next matter we're going to deal with is urban lanes encroachment. And we have a delegation, I believe, in the room. Linda Hode, please. Thank you, Ms. Hode, for coming in today, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I don't think this will take 5 minutes. I'm here to ask you to defer this item. I believe it's premature to consider it before Planning Committee considers the companion report. And I believe that there may be some heated discussion at Planning Committee about this report. My other reason for asking you to defer the report is that there has been no consultation on either of these reports. I learned about the fact that this was on your agenda today because a development consultant sent me a copy of the Citizen article published on Thursday, the 28th of March, prior to the long weekend. The fact that there is no one else here to speak to this, I think, is in part because no one knows about it. There are very serious implications in the more so in the planning report, where the policy framework is going to be set out. I think it's premature to bring in regulations before the policy framework has been established and accepted. I think Mr. McGillis will agree with me. There is a great deal of interest in Ottawa communities where lanes are located in what's going to happen to the lanes. And I'm really shocked and surprised that there has been no consultation. We've been talking, some of us, with Mr. McGillis for several years about when is the report going to come out about lanes. We're interested, but if we don't know it's on the agenda, how are we going to come and tell you what we feel about it? This is a serious issue for many communities, and I think we do need to have effective consultation before Planning Committee considers the companion report, and certainly before you produce regulations. I believe you're going in the right direction, but it's premature, and I would ask that you defer this report until we can get some effective consultation on the matter of lanes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions to the delegation? Sorry? Just that's fine. But no questions directly for the delegation? Okay, thank you, Ms. Hode. And Councillor Wilkinson?
I'm not sure who on staff would be answering this part of it, but she makes a good point about the fact about how we're going to interface between the two reports. And when is the report going to Planning Committee?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. The two companion reports have been scheduled to be sequential, and Transportation Committee was first on the agenda, but both are to rise to Council on the same day, which is April 24th.
So this is at the next Planning Committee meeting next week?
That's correct.
Okay. So if we deal with this today, and what you're recommending is how we deal with them as roads, effectively, then Planning Committee makes some changes which makes difference to this. How do we handle that?
The two reports are coordinated, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, what is before you as Transportation Committee is the encroachment dimension, which is basically a reconfirmation of the provisions of the encroachment bylaw with further direction given to how to deal with encroachments based on the type of lane that exists. And what will be before Planning Committee in lockstep with the whole approach. The whole point of this is one of the first reports that is coming to rising to committees and council of the Intensification Implementation Group, which for 2 years has grouped members of many departments, and Mr. O'Keefe is here, Mr. Durafil is here, Mr. Nahas is here, to try to bring under one policy roof, if you will, as kind of a housekeeping, and provide further direction to how council deals with these types of assets that are city property. So the two are coordinated, obviously. The two are emanating from the same group and from the same work program.
So if we deferred it, for example, that would mean the planning committee would go to council before this one did, and we'd only have half of it done. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct, Mr.
And
Chairman.
is it your view that those should be at council at the same time, so that the two, we can deal with them as an entity together as opposed to separately at that point?
Yes.
Easy solution.
Okay. Well, so if we deferred it today, then the planning committee deals with it tomorrow. It would go to council in the 23rd, and we would not be dealing with this until May, so it wouldn't go until May, so we wouldn't have that coordinated approach. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
So you're suggesting we really need to deal with it today?
That was the plan indeed, yes.
Okay, I understand. I want to mull that over a little bit. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wickham, just to help here, we don't have a May meeting. So what I would suggest, and legal can help us with this, what I would suggest is, even though the reports from this meeting are to rise to council on the 10th, if we can put it over to the same meeting that it's going to be coming from planning committee, so both can be in front of council at the same time. I think that might be the solution if we're allowed to do that, legal.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's possible, but staff, Alan, just provide us that these two are really separate matters in the sense that they deal with two sides of a coin, one being the encroachment and the other one dealing with the management of those lanes and policy direction. And so while they could be dealt with independently, they would be preferred to go to the same council meeting. And since we're not meeting again till June, then that would push the planning report further a couple of months, unless we decided that we'd had a joint meeting.
No, but what I was suggesting is that even though we're dealing with it today, we hold this report to go to council until the same council meeting as planning. That's what I was suggesting, whether we could do that.
Well, I think that's what's planned. April
Mr.
24th. April.
If I can clarify, the committee of the clerk of the committee tells me that this will go at this point to the April 10th council meeting. So we have to defer it to go to the next council meeting, so it's in lockstep.
That's correct.
With planning.
April 24th should be the plan for both reports.
So what do we need to do here to do that? Do we need to give direction? Do we need to bring a motion? What do we need to do, Mr.
Well, the
Nahas?
clerk's office could put it on the April 24th agenda as opposed to the 10th.
Okay. Does that satisfy your concerns, Councillor Wilkinson? Okay. Councillor Blows.
Well, first of all, I'm a little surprised by the sudden urgency of this to go to council, whether it's the next one or the subsequent one. Encroachment issues in back alleys and lanes has been around ever since the Champlain Sea covered this land. There was no great urgency before in dealing with this. There have been all kinds of, and I'm looking at this, how does the policy and the operational side fit together? Well, the policy really directs the operational side. And when I read in here about the management of these lanes, I think the policy needs to be in place. And there's no, to me, there's no complication in delaying this, deferring this, until such time as planning deals with the policy. And I think Ms. Hode is quite correct that we haven't given this, we're talking about developing a consultation process that'll encompass people. Well, we do exactly the opposite. So I don't know why we spend time and money on consultation processes when we really don't give the public an opportunity to be part of the process. I would suggest we defer this. We deal with it at planning first, and when it's ready to go to council after planning, it can be held until this committee deals with it. There's no great rush in getting there. I'm reading things here about the encroachment fees will not represent large sums and are not cost-effective for staff to police lane encroachments, but as is common practice, the city will respond to requests for investigation. In fact, the city generally has walked away from when there are complaints, especially where it involves two neighbors, where one neighbor has basically taken over 100% of the alley abutting their property. The other neighbor wants their 50% share, and we sort of wash our hands of it to a great degree unless a councillor intervenes. So I'm just curious how we figure we can improve on this if we don't have a proper policy in place.
Mr. Chairman, again, the work that the team has been doing for the past 2 years, as was directed by Council in 2010, was intended to integrate the approaches and practices and management policies of all departments, of all city departments. So this is one of the examples where we've been able to break the silos across the city departments and really come together, come together as an organization to align and give clarity and transparency to how council will manage its lane assets. There has never been any urgency, and then there's the immediate urgency of the dozens of incidents that happen, and what this is proposing is for council to allow staff to have a reference point and policy with which to respond to these issues. Okay. In many cases, it's not changing what exists, but in other cases, it is putting a structure to how the city addresses these types of issues.
And I would suggest that starts with a clear policy emanating from planning committee, and then this builds on top of that. So I would suggest I'm going to move deferral, and I will vote for deferral until such time as planning has dealt with this.
Thank you for that. Any questions or comments on deferral? No, I appreciate it. I've got you on the list, Councillor Clark, but rules necessitate that we deal with deferral first. So are there any comments or questions on deferral? Okay, Councillor Clark.
Sure. I do not believe that this is a separate issue. I think it's part of the same issue. We have these lanes, and unlike Councillor Blois, I wasn't around here when the Champlain Sea was here, but I think what we have legitimately is a mixture. Some lanes, we've already sold pieces of them off and left a patchwork quilt up the lane. And more recently, we have a lane that's been sort of left in disuse and sort of adverse occupancy by the neighbors. And somebody wants it open to be able to use the lane to access his property from the rear. So we had to get people to remove some obstructions. We're going to have more of that as more and more people realize this is an asset. Meanwhile, people are somehow or other assuming that this land belongs to them, and we need to have an encroachment policy which will reserve the city's interest, and that's why we should pass it now and pass it on as a whole report to planning as part of the policy discussion, because that's where it belongs, as you pointed out, Mr. Bowles. But the reality is that we should pass our views on the encroachment policies to Planning Committee. So I'd say not defer it, but rather refer it to Planning Committee as a whole cloth once we've finished the discussion on it.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Are there any other comments or questions on deferral? Councillor Deans.
Mr. McGinnis, what public consultation occurred around this report?
Mr. Chairman, unlike Planning Act applications, lanes are public highways and come under different legislation, and Public Works manages the public highways of the city under under its own legislation in the greater interest of the taxpayers of Ottawa. So there are not the same mechanisms for dealing with public highways as there are for planning applications. So in this particular case, we did not have the same or the equivalent amount of or the same type of discussion as would happen with private development on private land. In other words, the way that the city manages its roadways, its sidewalks, its back lanes, belongs to a family of legislation that is different than what people might be expecting when it deals with development applications on private land, and that's why there is a difference in the approach here.
So the answer is no public consultation.
That's the short answer. The long answer would be when lanes are deeded to the city under a plan of subdivision, that is when the public consultation technically takes place. It just so happens that in a lot of cases in the old parts of the city, that could be 100 years ago. They're now city property.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for staff?
Question, technical question.
On the deferral?
On the deferral.
Okay.
What you wanted. On the question of Councillor Clark of bringing it as a joint report to Planning Committee? That's not on referral.
Okay, I have a couple of questions for staff on the deferral issue and then a couple of comments. Was there anything different in how or when this report was made public than any other report that goes to this committee at any time?
No, Mr. Chairman. The report went live as per the city's normal procedure when it was put on the agenda.
So it was available online like any other report in the normal course?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
And I'm making an assumption here. I'm asking you to confirm or deny it, but I'm assuming that the report that's here today and the report that's proposed to go to planning, they were not done in isolation. They were put together by the same team, both knowing the ramifications of the respective reports, and in that sense, staff will be speaking to the entire issue as opposed to the transportation issue and the planning issue.
That's right,
There's
Mr.
no
Chairman.
surprises in terms of the people who put together the report and will be available at either committee to answer questions about the report.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. I'm joined by colleagues from all the departments that participated, except police services, I believe, couldn't be here today, and the same will be true of Planning Committee next week on April 9th. The way that we arranged this was to have the two produced together by the same team. It's really a big administrative exercise, if you will, and then to rise to the same council meeting so that they could be dealt with as a package.
I'm going to be voting against deferral based on the information you just provided, that they're not put together in isolation, and the simple principle that someone has to step forward first. You know, you go to planning and planning says, well, have you dealt with it at transportation? No, they wanted you to deal with it first. Well, we think you should deal with it first at transportation. So somebody has to take that first step. Staff seems to have a plan forward. There was a bit of a glitch in as to when they were going to go to council. Legal has helped us fix that problem. So both will be in front of council at the same time if we vote against deferral today. And it can be full discussion with all staff there on all issues. So I will be voting against deferral, and as much as I'm not often in that place, I support the position that Councillor Clark put forward that this is an issue that needs to be addressed, and we have a good report in front of us, so we should just go ahead with it. Thank you. I'll call the vote then. Yep, yeas and nays.
Sorry, Councillor Chernyshenko?
Yes.
Councillor Clark? Councillor Deans?
No.
This is on deferral.
Can you change your vote?
Yeah.
Yes, you can change your vote.
That's right. No
this
to
is a vote
no
on the
to
deferral.
deferral. Thank you.
Councillor Fleury?
No, and I won't change.
Councillor Moffat? No. Councillor Tierney?
No.
Councillor Wilkinson?
No.
Councillor Hubely?
No.
Chair?
No.
1 yea, 9 nays.
So on the report itself, any other questions questions or comments? Thank you, Councillor Clark, on the main report. Councillor Wilkinson. I'd make him wait.
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, I think that this is actually a policy report, despite what people say. These roads are under jurisdiction of the Transportation Committee, not under the Planning Committee. People have said this is not a policy statement. There is a policy statement in there. The policy is the different categories are listed as policies. So I don't think we can just forward this to Planning to deal with. I think if you want to, we could approve it and forward it to Planning Committee so that they can have it in front of them at the same time to be able to see how they fit together, which I think would be helpful at Planning Committee. But I think we have responsibility to deal with what's under the jurisdiction of the Planning Department, the Transportation Department first.
I don't disagree, and I'm not sure that Councillor Clark has actually put forward a referral. He was speaking against the deferral. Is that correct? And do you intend to put forward a request for referral?
I think, Mr. Chair, we should deal with it. Now, I could speak to why, but I think it's been very eloquently presented already.
Well, you're next on the list. Do you have comments on the report?
Essentially, I think we should deal with it, and as a codicil to the report, refer it to be part of the consideration at planning.
And I personally don't have a quarrel with that, but we'll let the rest of the people speak to it. Councillor Fleury.
Yes, I have two questions to staff relating to the report. The first one being, I know I'm not on Planning Committee, but I'm also interested in the intensification guidelines. So what is, are our goals of intensifying, how does that relate to urban lanes?
Mr. Chairman, through you, the existing residential on-street parking permit system was brought in by the old City of Ottawa in 1980 to try to deal with and stem the flow of front yard parking applications that were proliferating. And that's one of the issues and one of the hints that we have as we now get back into intensification on neighborhood streets that are gathering momentum. And therefore, we are faced with a succession of curb cuts and front yard parking pads or garages in front that very profoundly affect the look and feel of neighborhoods, the walkability of neighborhoods, the safety of pedestrians, and the availability of on-street parking supply. When there is a private parking pad provided off the street and there's a curb cut every 15 feet, well, when the owner of that parking space disappears and goes to work, nobody can use the spot and nobody can park on the street. Whereas with on-street parking, once the person parked on the street disappears, that place is free and available. In the blocks that have lanes, we are finding that it's a much different proposition to have access organized with two curb cuts, one at the beginning of the block and one at the end of the block, rather than one curb cut per property. It's something that we have found in the neighborhoods that have the back lanes really brings an advantage, logistical advantage and transportation advantage from a lot of different perspectives. And more of a public works question. I'm wondering, now that some of these lanes through time might not have been utilized to the extent to which what was described in terms of the urban landscape, if someone does bring forward a new development and does bring the car access to that lane, will we reconsider the clearing of that, the winter clearing of that lane?
Currently, we're doing with winter maintenance based on old legacy system still. We haven't incorporated new lanes in, but it would be part of the review of the growth demands in the area. If there's going to be a growth, that pressure would have to be accommodated if we're going to do the maintenance.
I can understand what you said around the growth, and that's more of a, but if there's a current lane that's not plowed, and there's someone that comes in at the end of the lane and does do the objectives of not having the the street curb cut, but offering that garage at or that entrance from the lane at the back, are we going to reconsider to offer the plowing options?
We'd have to deal with that through the Planning Act. So when they do the construction, it would be done through site plan. I would expect that that's how we'd incorporate it.
If I can just maybe add, Mr. Chairman, in many, if not most cases where a city-owned lane is being used for access, the city does not winter maintain. We winter maintain, as a matter of fact, very few city-owned lanes. And it's usually in the interest of the owners of that block to contract out their own maintenance, for the simple reason that the city treats lanes in last order of priority, and people just don't have 2 or 3 days to wait to get to work. So it just works better to have a block-by-block private maintenance, and that's usually what we get into now when we, for instance, comment on Committee of Adjustment applications for severances, that we enter into a maintenance and liability agreement with the owner, providing for that winter maintenance to take place by the private owners.
Excellent. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments for staff? Okay, Councillor.
What we're talking about here is city property. Since it's been, in a lot of cases, expropriated without any documentation, I think reserving the city's position of ownership is best enforced through an encroachment policy as opposed to a bulldozer. And the encroachment policy doesn't need to be large sums, but it needs to be something that recognizes who owns the property, and that's the whole purpose of this thing as far as I can see.
Thank you, Councillor. So the vote before us today is that we recommend Council adopt the encroachment policy for urban lanes attached as document 1 to the report, and that it be referred to Planning Committee. Yes?
I've just been looking at the Planning Committee report because it's online now, and they have exactly the same recommendation about approving the policies. And it looks like the policies are the same in that report as the appendices as this one. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, what's before you here at Transportation Committee is what pertains specifically to the encroachment bylaw, which is something that this committee has jurisdiction over. What is before Planning Committee has to do with the policies that will deal with the management of the lanes in a variety of planning contexts. The two work together. So what we have here for ease of cross-reference, perhaps, is a repetition in the appendix. I think attachment 2 to your report is also attachment 1 to the Planning Committee report. And to get back to an earlier question...
We're both asked to approve those.
Well, actually, Planning Committee will be dealing with attachment 2. Attachment 2 is here for your reference, but Planning Committee will be dealing with Attachment 2. What's in front of you is really Attachment 1. The two are included here because the classification system is something that is needed under the policy proposals for encroachment. And that classification system, by the way, is not new, Mr. Chairman. It's a legacy type of classification that has existed in the pre-amalgamation City of Ottawa for, I think, at least 40 years. So we're simply bringing that as part of the housekeeping and administrative cleanup that we're doing with these policies.
Thank you for that. So as indicated, the vote is on the report to refer it to recommend Council adopt and that it be referred to Planning Committee as part of its consideration of the companion report. And Mr. Nahas, do we have to have anything in there related to moving it from, should we specify the date of Council, since everything else from this meeting is going on the 10th? Do we need to do that, or just leave that to the clerk's office?
Well, we would put a direction, Mr. Chair, but just on the issue of referring this to planning, again, the jurisdictional issues, the terms of reference that we're dealing with, the actual aspects under transportation, they will also have before them consideration, as we have as an attachment to what planning will be looking at and what we're looking at. But they don't have any jurisdiction over the matters that we're deciding today. So I think a referral is out of order.
Even if it's a referral, as Councillor Clark asked for them to take it in as part of their consideration of their report? We're not asking them to pass the report. We're making that recommendation as part of the vote for Council to adopt. We're simply saying, if I'm getting Councillor Clark correctly, he wants Transportation Committee or Planning Committee to be aware of what we have done when they're discussing the matter there.
For that limited purpose, yes, that's fine.
So do we need to change the wording of the current motion to satisfy your concerns, or is it okay as is? Because I think that's what Councillor Clark is asking for.
That we deal with the matter and we pass it on to Planning Committee, not to vet our report or vet our decision, but to consider it as part of the larger process.
Would it be helpful if we changed the motion for information purposes as opposed to as part of its consideration?
Yes, Mr. Chair, then two directions. One, to make sure this report is forwarded to the April 24th council meeting, and also to refer this to the Planning Committee as information purposes only.
We'll just finish typing it up on the screen first, Councillor Forey. Okay. So on the motion before us then? Carried? Thank you. The next matter, I believe, is item number 6. Well, we wrapped it into one motion. If you look at the screen, it's all part of one piece.
We need a second recommendation. I think you're right.
Okay, do you want to move that, Councillor Wilkinson? It's fine. So on this... That's fine. Carried? Next matter is item number 6, outdoor patio encroachment 297 Dalhousie, and I believe Councillor Fleury had some questions.
Do have a couple of questions. I wanted to first off thank staff for making themselves available when we met with the stakeholders in the area. Some of the comments initially to the proponents' initial proposal was around sidewalk width and noise. So could you maybe highlight to me what these changes are with this report coming forward?
Mr. Chair, the original proposal was to have the patio next to abutting directly next to the sidewalk, which is about 1.5 meters away from the curb. Staff is recommending that railing be pushed back to 1.8 meters, which means that the railing would not be directly abutting the sidewalk. And then there's a further pooling area on the Dalhousie side of about 2.8 meters. Just to go back, the 1.8 meters is actually the minimum requirement as per the city's accessibility standards. So we feel that would provide enough unencumbered pedestrian width. In terms of noise, we've recommended a sound attenuating wall abutting the residential property right next door of about 2.2 meters. I think the proponents are actually considering something considerably higher, maybe closer to 4 meters.
Excellent. Could you maybe, I recall the discussion that we've had with the staff on this, but we have an existing pole at 1.6 meter on the sidewalk. Is that correct?
That's right. Correct, Mr. Chair. There was actually a sign which had the initial proposal gone through. That sign would have been within the patio. We've asked that, like I said, the railing be moved back so the sign's actually outside the patio and gives us more unencumbered space on the sidewalk side.
Okay. And we had also some concerns. I mean, there's obviously always concerns, and we hear it often in the area around the proximity to residential impacts. So just for review purposes, this application would, or staff would review this file and work through the issues in mitigation. But how, on which basis would that occur?
Mr. Chair, these are annual permits, and as part of the bylaw requirements provisions, staff is required to monitor any noise complaints and anything that is out of the ordinary. And basically, there are numerous complaints. We would report back to this committee with recommendations.
Great. Thank you.
Any Any other questions or comments on this particular report? Received? Thank you. Oh, sorry, adopted, carried. That is the last matter on the list. We have no notices of motion. Any inquiries? Any notices of motion for consideration at a later meeting? You can put whatever you like in for consideration. Other business? Adjournment? Okay, thank you.